All right. I'm so excited to be here with my friend Jamie, who I've had the opportunity to meet and have some pretty juicy conversations with. And we're going to dive right in. I feel like I want to start talking about your magic and the thing that we're going to go forward with, but I want you to be able to welcome yourself into the space. So let us know how you want to be known in this space as you step in to be honored and share with this community.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for even giving me the space. I love people who create spaces like this for other people. So I really appreciate you thinking of me and inviting me into this space. I'm Dr. Jamie Muskopf, but I absolutely want to be called Jamie. I just want to acknowledge that role and that thing that I have earned and manifested in my life, which is important to me. My work is in social work, but really my background is in technology and knowledge management. And so I've worked really in military and business for 20 years. And really where I'm at right now and who I am is a person who's really seen the need for all of us in society to really look at ourselves and look at how we connect with one another so that we can work together and collaborate with one another, so that we can build communities where we are safe, loved, respected, welcomed, whether it's in business or in our neighborhood or in everyday life. I find those things so valuable, especially, and that's just only kind of, heightened by what all is happening in the United States and in the world right now. So I would say, I am a social impact entrepreneur. I am a mom and a wife and a person who really is just focused on building community and helping people do that.
Yeah. Yes, I remember we were in an online group and you used the term radical community ship. And I was like, say more. I'm coming for you. I am coming for you. Because I think that's something that we share is this deep belief that where we are in this collective experience is that we are so hungry for for a different way of being with each other and cultivating connection and belonging. And it's a rebellious act to stand for that. I think there's a hunger for it, but it's quite counterculture in a lot of ways. So what can you tell me about what radical communityship is through your lens?
Yeah, well, so I'm going to be true to myself and read you what I wrote because ultimately, I'll tell you that radical communityship, the idea of it, came to me after having spent a week in a workshop where I was learning something called conversational leadership. And it was a difficult workshop, I'll tell you that. And it was full of people who I would say were very open hearted, open minded. But even that being the case, it was still a difficult space to be in. And so, I every day I came out of that experience with like, what did I learn and what did I hear and what are we all, what is manifesting in this space? And what then came was a reflection that I wrote. I wrote a blog post called Radical Communityship. And really from that point forward, I've been thinking about it and wanting to sort of, develop it a little bit more as an idea. But I want to read you the definition of what at that moment in time I defined radical communityship as. So I define it as a process that occurs when the members of a community explicitly agree to practice and support one another in the practice of radical self awareness, radical self love, radical candor, and conversational leadership with the intent of moving not only themselves, but society forward towards systemic equity and justice. That's a lot. It's a big thing, but that's what makes it radical in many ways. That's part of what makes it radical. But really, and I use the word radical on purpose because, like you just said, to focus on being self-aware, first of all, to focus on the self is a radical act. especially in, among women, especially in our culture now. We're just give, give, give. We're always putting in, we're always climbing, we're going. But to focus on the self, really focus on the self, I think is a radical act. To focus on radical self-love is a radical act, to love yourself enough to care for yourself and to recognize, the goodness in you and your capacity and all that you do is something that most people these days don't spend time doing. And then, candor, same thing. It starts rolling into that idea of conversational leadership where, it's very hard now to have conversations that matter, conversations that are meaningful, that are, truthful, that have real candor in them, meant to explain, this is how I feel, this is how I see things, without people, who are on opposite ends or on differing perspectives or paths on those things, kind of coming together and creating kind of chaos, versus a space where we can say, your truth and my truth, they're real to us, and they can exist in the same space, and so can we. And what does that mean, and what can we create from that? I think that that's really powerful. And so this idea that, we are in very deep need of looking at ourselves and reflecting on ourselves and being present and aware of how we show up in spaces, and bringing that into this idea of leadership and building community. I think all those things are really important because as a person who's worked in all kinds of environments, you only have to work in an office for a while to really realize when people are showing up, when their body is showing up, but they're not showing up. And I always wonder, like, why be there if you're not able to show up as your whole self and in yourself in a moment? Like, why are you there? We only have so many years that we're fortunate enough to be granted of life, if we get that. So why spend any of it sort of out of body? And I say that because I've spent a lot of times out of body and not wanting to be there. And I don't want to live my life like that. And I don't want others to live their lives like that either. So that's kind of where this idea came from and what it's really centered on.
Yeah. And what I hear in that is perhaps the most radical thing is just standing for this other possibility, because
Mm.
people are dissociative in their day-to-day lives because I think, many people believe that's just the way it is.
Mhm.
We're just going to be in this very polarized culture. We're just going to be miserable in our work because that's the way it is. We're just, there's this idea that it has to be that way. And what I'm hearing you stand for, and I know what I stand for in my own way, is it doesn't have to be that way. There's another way. It's not the way that most of us are gifted in our early life learning, but it's a knowing and a practice that can be claimed and claimed through intentional practices, intentional ways of being, and like you said, really hard moments and hard conversations, because it's it's not being vulnerable and real and holding differences and all of that. It's not the easy path. It's the better path. Not better as in one is bad, one is good, but better, like richer. But
Mhm.
it's not the easy path.
No, not at all. I mean, just think about it, right? Like, who doesn't want to have a job where you can just kind of be on cruise control, right? You don't have to worry about things. You have a boss, and really, if something goes wrong, it's their fault, not mine. So, how many people exist in the world like that, because it's emotionally, mentally easier to do that for many people.
I've wished
Because
for that. I've wished
right,
to want
right.
that before. I'm like, can't I just want a job? Can I please? Why do I have to like do my own thing?
Right, because it's so much more intense to be the one. And the cool thing about, conversational leadership and communityship, period, and, conversational leadership is something that I learned about through my friend John Hovel and our sort of shared, sort of icon in our field, David Gertine. him and then David Gerting kind of introduced me to this idea of communityship through his work, and that's Henry Mintzberg's work. But this idea that it's not about like shared leadership, right, where everybody is like, we are all the boss. It's not about being the boss. It's actually the idea that we're all in a space and we have the agency to lead when it's necessary, and that we also have the courage to do that when it's necessary. And I think those are two really important distinctions from just like shared responsibility of things,
Yeah.
because that means then, you are conscious and recognize the fact that you're not going to sit back and let someone else do the thing that needs be doing. And I'll give you an example, and I hope that I don't get in trouble for giving this example, but I was in a meeting a couple days ago, and the speaker, the speaker had 20 minutes to talk. And right off the bat, I was rubbed the wrong way by how the speaker was presenting, how it's framed. But there was one person in the whole event that immediately was like, what is your point? And she stepped forward and was like, I don't get this. I need you to clarify why this should matter to me. And then the person kept going, and then she interjected again. And then she and I had a conversation after that, just the two of us. And she was like, when can we get to the point where everyone in that room would have felt the courage or ability to speak up? And I was like, that is radical communityship, right? Because I processed with her. I'm like, well, in my mind, this was not my forum, and I understand the rules of this forum, which was a person is given 20 minutes and then the rest of the time we all spend talking, and I'm not to interrupt that 20 minutes. But she was like, why? Why not? If you were not feeling it or, needing this, why not speak up? And I'm like, you're absolutely right. And that's this, that is this. But in order to be in a space like that, you have to create it. You have to say out loud, this is a space in which you can do this. I'm expecting radical communityship here, because that means that injection is not like, ooh, like, why did she talk? But it's more like, oh yeah, okay, I'm feeling that. I'm feeling her. I'm letting her feel that. I'm feeling that too. And I'm going to say something, not in a way that's attacking, but in a way that's questioning.
Yeah.
Like, this is what's coming up for me right now. Can we talk about this? Can we talk about how we're speaking and sharing this space right now? Like, those are things like how I've had very few conversations like that in my lifetime, but those are the ways in which I think if we're going to move forward as a society, if we're going to excel in business, if we're going to excel in life, and make ourselves a better world, which we're all really craving, I think, inside ourselves, we have to create spaces like that. We have to create, kind of this community for ourselves, and and have the right to exist in communities where we can really behave like that.
Well, and what I hear is we want community where people get to show up whole and in
Mhm.
their sovereignty rather than, I mean, I certainly can speak from my own experience. I learned unconsciously, but learned very clearly that in order to be part of community successfully, I had to leave lots of pieces of myself at the door. I
Yeah.
had to be this version so that I could be in community and feel a sense of deserving and, pleasing of other people, all that stuff. And what you're speaking of is in many ways similar to the leadership training I got through the Coactive Training Institute, which is it's a very organic model.
Mhm.
It's rooted in this sense of radical personal responsibility and awareness where
Yes.
we ask ourselves, what is mine in this moment? What is true for me and what is mine to do? What is the leadership that is being called forth from me? And sometimes that's sitting back and holding wildly supportive space and being silent. And other times it's being that person who looks around and goes, nobody's going to say shit right now. Guess what? But really tuning in and tuning into the space and oneself and holding that self and other and greater awareness. And then leading from that, like leading from all of it from a place of wholeness, like that's when magic happens.
Yeah, and I want to make, because when you're speaking, it's coming up for me, the need to make a distinction between, because I think we've been in spaces and we've been the people in spaces where in moments we'll complain about something. We'll just be like, ah, I can't, but we're not. I think most of the time when we do that, we're not conscious of where that's coming from inside ourselves, right? Like
Yeah.
it could be, I'm hangry, I'm tired, I don't even want to be here right now. And it has nothing to do with the speaker or what's being said. I'm just irritable,
Yep.
right? And so we'll show up like that. And I think part of radical communityship in this, radical self-awareness is going into a space in a conversation, let's say, and understanding, being tuned in, first of all, to the fact that I'm hangry, I'm irritable, I'm tired. So if I'm going to contribute, if I'm going to speak up, if I'm going to react, I need to know that I might react from that place. And so I can choose, like, okay, like maybe I'm not going to say anything because it's not what's being said, it's me and how I'm feeling right now reacting to that. And that's huge. That's like a whole other level of cognitive ability and emotional ability. And that's the kind of thing that I think we need to foster in ourselves and develop, as opposed to this, unconsciousness of, showing up and really allowing ourselves to be more reactionary to things, right? And I'm not saying that, like, I don't want to, because I don't want to equate vulnerability and authenticity with reactionary, right? Like
Oh no.
some
Yeah.
people think like, oh, if they're just being honest, it's like, no, they're really just reacting to something. And
Yeah.
that's not being authentic. That's just being like, that is being true to how they're feeling in the moment, but it's doing so in an unconscious way. And,
And
so
it's
the conscious,
projections.
right, exactly. And so, so I can see from how we're talking about it that, there's so many kind of finer points to, to outline for this. And I'm appreciative of you saying those things that are making me think that.
Yeah. Well, and I know when I'm creating spaces, radical personal responsibility is always a point, and it's part of the Sacred Rebellion Collective, because
Sure.
this isn't a like I'm going to show how woke I am and everybody has to agree with me. This isn't that space. This is a
Mhm.
space of understanding others, and hopefully there will be things that are said that ping ping us on the inside like ooh, because that's the invitation, right?
Right.
That's the invitation to be more self-aware, to heal some of those things that lead to projections. But again, unless one is trained like you and I are in psychological fields and things like that, often this isn't a skill set that's shared with people. But it's not necessarily an easy practice, but I think it's easier than people think to create spaces that have these expectations. And it's
Yeah.
it's it's really about taking the time to be intentional about designing the space and how people are going to interact and setting those. I don't like the term ground rules, but in essence, like
Yeah.
being clear at the onset about it, because then that gives space for those uncomfortable conversations. It gives space for one to be able to say, y'all, I'm hangry. And if you feel, I know that there's some really sensitive people in here, you're probably going to feel it. I want you to know I'm hangry, straight up. Like, I'm going to deal with that. I'm going to take responsibility, but please don't make up any stories. And then, like, something that could have been a thing is no longer a thing, because
Right.
it's an assumption of we take care of ourselves, we honor ourselves, and we honor each other in this
Yes.
community.
Yes. That is, and that's so it, like, I keep thinking, the words that come up for me are like practice space, or because
Yeah.
it's like when you're a musician, for example, in the band room or whatever, like you can make those mistakes. That's the place for you to
Yes.
totally screw it up. And there's an expectation at some point that you are performing, and but ultimately in that space you're able to be like, ugh, I'm terrible right now, I'm fumbling. And ideally I would see, radical communityship being that process of creating spaces where, it's like, this is okay, it is okay to be fumbling here. We support you, we're hearing you. And I mean, it's kind of like, I'll frame it around my own parenting. It's taken me a while of being home with my children to really go, like, to really tune in to them, to really, instead of being angry or upset by the way that they're reacting, it's really going, okay, like, well, right now she is hangry, she's tired, she can't dial into this right now, and oh, by the way, she's 8, you know. You know what I mean, things like that. Because I think, bad parenting is, ultimately, it's not listening, it's not hearing, it's not seeing what's going on in the situation and then being able to temper yourself to respond to that, versus I am upset, I'm hearing this yelling and yelling and yelling, and I'm over it. It's the ability to put yourself, sort of, to empathize, to put yourself in that other person's shoes and go, yeah, she's not feeling this right now, okay, so I'm not going to get in a battle, this is going nowhere. But, and I think that is radical communityship. It's being in community with other people and recognizing that if they're saying something or doing something that's just not rubbing you the right way, think about why that might be, and recognize that it's not a personal attack, if it isn't. I mean, because sometimes it could be, but, let's, but assess it. Don't just assume, really sit and think and assess it based on what's going on with that person, and allow them that space to be in whatever they're in. Um, and that's hard. That is so super hard.
Well,
um,
and you're illuminating the very necessary intention that is, I can't be in authentic empathy with others if I'm not in compassionate relationship with myself.
yeah.
It's
Oh,
just pretending.
yeah.
If and I think that's what we're taught in many ways, is kind of to make nice and to like look caring, and whatever the things are, let it roll off, it's no big deal, or make it super personal, rather than that sacred and necessary step of being in relationship with ourselves while we're relating in the world. And that's
Hmm.
where that choice to be in radical personal responsibility as a practice comes in, is we have to listen, and we have to know that we're hangry, we have to
Hmm.
know that this is an issue that tends to trigger us because of whatever, even if we don't know why. And really holding both feels like such an important point to illuminate, because I think we're an either or culture. We just, that's the way our brains like to work, black and
Hmm.
white thinking, either or. And it doesn't work in community, it has to be both and.
Yeah. And that is kind of my mantra this
Yep.
year, is and over or, or and not or, because that really is where we need to be. And it's hard to get there, but I do believe that these, specific practices put together, can help us get there. And it does, I think the hardest part of, what I'm calling radical communityship is that self-awareness piece. It's the self-love and self-awareness, because a lot of us have shit we just don't want to deal with. We just don't. Everybody.
Everybody.
And I will put that away. I mean, like, and it's because it's funny. Like, I feel like the work that I do now and my commitment to, like, wanting people to be in community, is, all that kind of stems from a really painful place in my life where, my mother developed dementia at 54 years old. And, she was the typical American, in the sense that she was one of those people who was waiting till they retired and to do the things. And, and then here she is inflicted with this disease that takes her entire life away from her, and even though she's physically there. And, I think to myself, my gosh, like, we are a culture of people waiting for something to happen to us and waiting for moments to happen, when we are in charge of the moments. Like, we make the moments. And if we do make the moments, then, like, what are we going to do about it? And I think a lot of, things that I run away from is dealing with that situation emotionally. I don't want to think about my mom being in the condition that she's in, or how all of that kind of, played out in our family. Those are really painful things. But at the same time, I know, and I have to be conscious of the fact that I bring that into my work. I bring that into who I am. I bring it into conversation. I bring it into how I perceive things. Um, and it's a painful thing, but it's important to recognize that it's with me, and we all have things that we bring with us. And and I think like it is a radical thing to know that you have that, and that it's there with you, and to know that you have control over it. You can have control over it. You can have power, um, even if these things feel overwhelming or like they're taking away your power. You can take it right back. And and at the same time, and this is where radical communityship comes in, you can recognize that other people are doing the exact same thing in the same moment, and you can allow them that space, and and support them in that act, which you yourself know is really hard because you're doing it right then too. So
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
one of the things I find every time I step into a group with a high level of intimacy is that illusion of separation
Mm.
starts to just collapse in on itself. And we are, to hold the perhaps one of the most core aspects of paradoxical humanity, it's we are all so beautifully unique and different, and we are all so the same and part of the whole at the same time. And community has a way of reflecting that to us that's really powerful, and I find it really healing, because when we're trying to carry the burden of some of our personal pain, right, like our story, our burden to bear, whatever that is, it's really heavy and overwhelming. And we can have all the stuff around like protecting other people from our shit, whatever the thing is that we have. But when we are able to bring it into safe and loving community, it starts to heal. It starts to feel lighter because of I make up. It's because we're sharing the humanity of the experience with others. It's not gone from our life. It's not easy all of a sudden, but it's like held together with others. And there's something so powerful about that. And we've had conversations about just all of these massive conversations we're having about the changes that the world is being called to embrace now. And I really hold the belief we are not going to be able to make those changes from an individual, like that determined, isolated individual siphoned kind of way. We will only be able to do it through community. And we're kind of like toddlers,
Hmm.
remembering how to do community in the way that I make up it was done very naturally in many other cultures and distant times. But we're having to fumble to remember what
Mm.
is so innate in us, which is a really interesting thing.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny. I mean, so innovation is kind of a buzzword. It's been a buzzword for a long time, and people argue like, what is innovation? And innovation is really kind of three things. It's creating something new, doing the something new, and then having that something new be diffused among groups of people. That's really innovating. And so where we are in humanity is we need to innovate humanity. Like we are in a place where we need to really shift how we are doing things, but it's not like, because innovation isn't necessarily creating something totally brand new no one's ever seen before. It could be applying things we already know and understand, whether that be really innate in ourselves or something that we know that's out there. It's just applying it in a different way that then you generates a different result or a different value. And I think that there's so much to everybody who is trying to make an effort to do that right now consciously. And it's not like a competitive effort. It's more like a, ooh, like, what are you doing? Like, I love that Megan is doing this, this sacred space, like, I love that, because it's helping. It's helping us move toward these spaces, because we don't all need to be in the exact same space. But I think it's the idea that we can be in different spaces and go through this, in community with other people, that's really going to make this huge huge difference, and it's a necessary difference right now, because I can't, how you get from this sort of constructed polarity that we're in to a place where we're back together. Like, all I need to do is go back in my mind to maybe like childhood and a luau, like a baby luau, and remembering how many tons of people were there, and none of them all got along. None of them all, had the same ideas about everything or whatever. But man, did we have a good time. Man, did we love getting together. And wasn't that food great? And wasn't that music beautiful? And weren't we loving the kids and seeing them play? I mean, these are things that can happen and do happen. And it feels like they don't happen as much, especially as we're isolated and all of that. But, but they can happen, and they need to happen, because that's where the magic of humanity happens.
And we
Honestly.
need some magic.
Yeah.
We're dialing in the magic. Thank you very much.
Mhm. I'm in that movement. I'm all about it.
Well, Jamie, I wanna close so that we can honor the fact that busy people are going to be watching this. But before we close, I'm curious about two things. If you have any resources or ways that you would like for people to be able to connect with you, if they want to kind of follow you or the people that have really inspired you, and are there any words that have been left unsaid that you really want to say before we close this conversation?
Sure. Thank you. So yeah, I'm on Instagram, which is probably like my favorite social media platform.
I'll link to it.
Um, you know, Jamie Muskopf on Instagram. That's it. I am a lot on LinkedIn, because I think I've built a pretty big network there of lots of different people, from many different industries. And so I will tend to post things there as well. But, those are kind of my two connection spaces. I'm in the process of updating my website. So if you go there, there isn't a whole lot there, but you can certainly go there and see the blog post about radical communityship there if you wanted to read that whole thing. And there will be there's a book that I'm writing about it that should come out next year. It's going to be more of an academic text, but what's cool is there's going to be a lot of stuff I'll probably post on the blog or a different website in the process, so we can connect there. And I think that the thing I want to close with is going back to something that you said earlier, which is this idea of us, that we've been in these modes where we have to leave pieces of ourselves at the door. And I am so passionate about never having to do that again. There never in my life, and having people not do that. And it's interesting, because if you go on social media and you see, all these conversations with people about, this is not professional, this is not a professional thing. For some people that is their profession, talking about social justice, talking about racism, talking about things that matter to them personally, that is what they do for a living. And so, yeah, it's a professional topic. But more important than that is, why do we have such an idea that we have to segment ourselves between, from work and life, like who I am in real life? Like, why can't I show up at work that way? And I'm not saying, and I think when I've said this in the past, people have made a distinction like, oh, she means like all the liberal people and the people who agree with her. And I do not mean that at all. I mean, if you're, some dude who like has whatever belief you have, why aren't you able to show up in that space as you? Because I want to know you, and I want to understand you. And because if I don't understand you, how am I going to expect you to understand me? How are we ever going to hear one another? So I think it's important for us to sort of explore this idea of, why can't we show up wholehearted, heart-centered, our whole selves into the spaces that we need to be, even if it's a professional space. Why not? What's holding us back from that? And what can we do? What can we use to create spaces, whether it's workspaces or other, where we can show up fully? And I'm hoping that through the process of kind of discovering and radical communityship, I'll contribute something to that knowledge in that way ahead. So
So a call for greater permission to be human in all of our
Yes.
humaning,
Yeah.
not just the doing and then the humaning, but to actually be more fully human in how we move through our lives.
Yeah.
Which
Absolutely.
sounds so obvious, and it's so not, because
Nope.
we leave our humanity at the door to do X, Y, and Z. Yeah. So I'm so grateful for this conversation, and I'm grateful for the work you're doing in the world, and the sense of, on a personal level, a sense of sisterhood I feel with the inspiration and excitement around the similar visions that we hold. So thank you on a very personal level for that, and for sharing with this community. So I
You're
appreciate you.
welcome. Thank you for letting me share. Great conversation.